Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of the Beards and Cars podcast, which you can incidentally grab in its audio-only form via the link below on SoundCloud, but for now, as I've said before, it is far more beneficial to the channel to listen to it here on YouTube. And incidentally, I do want to raise, along with the Fallout footage, which I'm using as the background imagery for this video, the reason why I've done that is twofold. One, because it kind of fits the theme that I'm discussing, as you'll have seen from the title and the thumb, but also more specifically, my second channel, which many of you may not realise I had, used to be dedicated to movie reviews. It was called Sledgehammer Movies, or SHM. But that channel has been dead since basically like May of last year, and the reason why was twofold. YouTube would demonetize a lot of it because it was mostly horror movie reviews, and then the ones that weren't demonetized tended to get claimed by various studios for using like one or two images from the movie. So ultimately, it killed the productivity of the channel, it made the videos basically pointless, and because the channel was so small, it just was basically a waste of time, given that the videos were like 20-30 minutes long on some occasions. So I've decided very recently, last week in fact, to resurrect the channel under a new banner. And actually, it's far more closely related to this channel now, because the second channel has been renamed HSG Unlimited. For those who have already seen it, you've probably checked out a couple of the videos that I've done. I've actually re-uploaded some of the non-racing videos from this channel onto that second channel, such as my review for the Jaws game, the Alice in Wonderland game, various others too. I'm going to be putting out fresh new content on there as well. Today even I put out a Fallout video, just a little funny clip. And again, I'm going to be doing more content for games like Fallout. I plan to be doing stuff for Terminator games, various other horror-based stuff, action-based stuff, basically all gaming that's non-car related. So if gaming beyond Gran Turismo and Forza interests you, then of course any support that you give to that second channel will be greatly appreciated, because it's nowhere near the size of this one. It's a much newer channel, especially in this new form. So yeah, go over, check it out. If you like it, stick around on the channel. If you don't, then of course just stick around on HSG Automotive instead. But with that housekeeping out of the way, that brings me back to the topic of the hour. And it's an interesting one, I think, because it's something which Forza has much more openly and more regularly done in an obvious, overt way than Gran Turismo has, and that is collabs. Because for those who don't play Forza, you're probably still aware of certain major crossovers that Forza has done. Recently with Lego, Top Gear in Horizon 4, the new format of Top Gear that is. They've worked with Hot Wheels in the past. They had a Fallout vehicle in Forza 4, I think it was, or Forza 5. I believe it was Forza 5 actually. They had, Top Gear in its original form back in Forza 4. They did some crossover with Jalopnik for car packs. So they've done quite a few cross-brand collabs. On the other hand, though, you have Gran Turismo, and although you could very easily think, well, Gran Turismo doesn't do any of that, it's just kind of silly, I mean, we don't want a Lego DLC pack in Gran Turismo, that, on the surface of things, is true. But the interesting thing is, a pretty fascinating thing actually, unless you've thought about it before yourself, is that actually Gran Turismo does do cross-brand collabs, except they don't do it with the same brands that Forza does. And Gran Turismo has been doing it for quite some time. Just think about it. They've done cross-brand collabs with events, such as the Goodwood Hill Climb. In Gran Turismo 6, there was an entire menu of events just dedicated to that one thing, in effect having a cross-brand collab with the Goodwood Festival of Speed, which is a similar thing, in effect, if you think about it, but more often than not, they tend to do collabs with stuff like drivers. You've got the Vettel challenges, the Hamilton challenges, the Senna challenges, and in the grand scheme of Gran Turismo, those kind of collabs and crossovers certainly make a lot more sense. One of my favourite things about Forza is that they don't take themselves too seriously. They have these crazy over-the-top collabs like Hot Wheels and Lego. At the same time, Gran Turismo has always been pretty self-serious, and it does take itself very seriously, so teaming up with famous drivers makes a lot more sense. If you wanted to, though, you could actually think even further down the path of Gran Turismo and think that actually they've even teamed up with more than that. They've teamed up, for instance, in effect, with the Vision GT program. So that's not one specific manufacturer, but it's kind of this creative collaboration between Gran Turismo and a number of different car manufacturers. But even that is fairly controversial. Especially in GT Sport, there seem to be a ton of people who do not like those cars. Far more, in fact, than the people who were saying that they didn't like them in Gran Turismo 6. Interesting. That's an interesting change that has happened. Then you also have stuff like, you could say an indirect collab in some ways between Gran Turismo and the SEMA Motor Show, or even Pebble Beach. But that's a very tangential one because it's basically just the GT award that gets given to a certain car at one of those events, and then the car may or may not end up in the game. So you could call that one a collab, not really, kind of. But that brings us to the question that I wanted to ask. The question in the thumbnail, the question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on down below, and that is, if you could actually choose which brand, which individual, maybe which manufacturer, which racetrack even, such as the Goodwood stuff, you would like to see Gran Turismo do a collab or a crossover with. Not necessarily in GT Sport, but just at any point. You could even say, theoretically, in a past game, because it's just that. It's a fun conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to be rooted in reality. You could go back and retroactively say, I would have liked this to have happened in an older game, for instance. Of course, it could be more realistic if you predict it for the future, but you could choose which way you want to go. For me, I think there are two that stand out the most. One of them is actually an entity who have worked with Forza, twice at least, and that is Top Gear. I think that there's a fairly obvious connection that could happen between Gran Turismo and Top Gear, although the fact that Forza is more playful and less self-serious definitely lends itself toward that. In fact, I could almost imagine Gran Turismo doing a team-up with Fifth Gear rather than Top Gear, or maybe even a team-up with Evo magazine, which I think would be pretty cool actually. I'm a big fan of Evo Mag. At the same time, though, I could see a similar thing happening in Gran Turismo's future to what they did with Goodwood. But, instead of Goodwood, Pikes Peak. Imagine if, Gran Turismo 6 style, you had a whole menu of Pikes Peak events, maybe sections of the Pikes Peak, and then you end up doing the full thing, with, of course, different vehicles that get maybe faster, more powerful, more challenging as you move along, just like the Goodwood events did. I don't recall what you started those with, but you infamously end up driving the Red Bull up the hill, and many people found that to be pretty challenging, because Goodwood has a very, very narrow road, and the Red Bull is a notoriously twitchy car, especially in that, I believe it was X2011 form. In, for instance, a Pikes Peak scenario, you could even, if you were going to make full use of it, have it as going through the decades. Because for those who don't know, the Pikes Peak has changed a lot over time. Most racetracks get updated and changed and renovated. Not as much as Pikes Peak, though. Pikes Peak has changed dramatically over the years. It used to have, I believe, completely dirt, if not almost completely. Then it was kind of 50-50 at a certain point, and now it's completely tarmac all the way up. So imagine if moving through those, you almost went by era. So you could do like a 50-50 dirt track with the Escudo, maybe like a modern thing with a Volkswagen IDR with the full tarmac, and kind of jump through the eras doing those different challenges. I think that for me, that might be the one that I would go for. It's certainly the one that, as you can tell, I've thought about the most detail with. And as far as cross-brand or creative collabs go, I believe it makes sense for three specific reasons. One, Pikes Peak has been in Gran Turismo before, in Gran Turismo 2. Secondly, they clearly have an interest in bringing it back because it was hidden in the files of Gran Turismo 5, and you could even drive on it, although it was an unfinished track. And thirdly, a number of vehicles, and possibly even, I believe, the Pikes Peak itself, has Gran Turismo as a sponsor. So I would argue there's actually quite a lot of very organic, natural tie-ins and crossover that could happen there. And it's certainly an event which a ton of people I think would love to see, because unlike Goodwood, you could quite easily have more stuff to do with Pikes Peak because of the length of the event. The Goodwood Hill Climb is such a short event, it takes like 40 seconds in the top vehicles, if not even less, that there's no real point in having an online event, because by the time you load the menu, go into the race, it lasts 40 seconds, you can't properly fit more than one vehicle on the track at one time anyway, and then you'd be loading back into the menu again. It would be the same problem that I had with the drag racing in the online aspect of Forza Motorsport 4, where you do like a half-mile drag, but then it would take like a minute or two to load the event in an online lobby, and you'd end up doing these really quick drag events that were spending more time in the loading menu than you were in the actual race, so I got bored of that really fast. In Pikes Peak scenarios, though, well, the event is much longer, so you could easily have a 6, 7, 8 minute event with maybe even more than one person. You can have like an online time trial, such as Sport Mode already has incorporated. I think there's a lot that you could do with it. And of course, even when the Pikes Peak is not in Gran Turismo has still had a number of Pikes Peak vehicles in the game, almost keeping the spirit of Pikes Peak alive, such as obviously the Escudo, the Cultus, but more recently even the Tajima E-Runner, the Monster Sport SX4. These are very much so Pikes Peak machines, so they clearly still have Pikes Peak on the brain, it's just technically not in the game anymore. It would not surprise me at all if that is a very near future plan. I mean, very near in the grand scheme of things, I'm not talking like next week, but it would not surprise me at all if Polyphony has plans to make Pikes Peak a major aspect of the game, either in GT Sport, which I would say at this point is maybe a little bit unlikely, especially with the PS5 rumoured for this year and GT7 possibly following very soon thereafter, if not at the same time. I would say it would be more likely the kind of big showcase feature that they would sell Gran Turismo 7 with. Of course, alongside new vehicles, new tracks, potentially, that kind of stuff. Imagine, for instance, if they released a Gran Turismo 7 trailer where you saw a couple of new cars in there, maybe a couple of new circuits like Imola, maybe Sepang, and then a Pikes Peak showcase in there as well with like a Peugeot 208 T16 and a Tajima E-Runner going up the hill. It's certainly the kind of centerpiece that I could see them having as the center stage of a next Gran Turismo game, and it is definitely something that a ton of players would be really, really stoked to see. So overall, I think that would be the most obvious one. I think that Top Gear, Fifth Gear, or Evo Magazine has potential to do a tie-in, but at the same time, I don't really see them doing that because, as I said, they tend to team up with manufacturers, drivers, or circuits more than anything else, and although the drivers have their own personalities, you don't really see much of that in the game. It's purely based on how fast they are. You don't see Hamilton cracking jokes. I personally feel that Gran Turismo wouldn't necessarily be harmed by a bit of Top Gear comedy, but I just don't really see that happening. So as I said, tell me down below, what do you think could be an interesting collab or a team-up? My money is on Pikes Peak in terms of likely ones, and also ones that would naturally find a place in the game. So yeah, that's my overall, not necessarily prediction, but certainly thoughts on that topic. If I was going to go purely down the fun route, well, I would love to see them do a collab with Fallout, because there are a number of interesting vehicles in the Fallout series, nuclear-powered cars, for instance, which would be pretty cool in Gran Turismo, kind of like those weird and wacky SEMA winners and Pebble Beach winners that we already have. Overall, though, that's it for this pick. As I said, tell me your thoughts down below. Do you think it's something that could happen again? I would say that as far as that question or discussion goes, it's almost definite, because the track record is there. They have teamed up with Vettel, Hamilton, Goodwood, all this kind of stuff. It's just a matter of when and who with. But overall, that's it for this installment. Of course, stick around on the channel for more, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.